This is Now What? Life After Redundancy. When your job disappears, but you don't. Hello. I'm Stevie, and you're joining me on my journey through and hopefully past redundancy, where I'm regularly asking myself the question, now what? And if you've ever updated your LinkedIn headline to something so vague it could describe literally any job on the planet just to buy yourself another week before anyone asks a direct question, or if you sat in an interview and said the words, I'm a real people person, and heard them land in the room with all the conviction of a hostage note, you're in the right place. This show is for anyone navigating redundancy or career transition. It's part practical, part perspective, part pep talk without the cringe. Each week, I'm working through whatever's actually made this stretch hard, which turns out to be a much longer list than I thought it would be. Now, this happens to be the 40th podcast episode. And 40 episodes either means I've said the word redundancy so many times it stopped sounding like a real word to me, or it means a genuinely surprising number of you have kept coming back week after week. And I think it's a bit of both. So before anything else, thank you. Handing over some of your Tuesday or whenever you catch this to a random person talking on a microphone about his employment status isn't nothing, and I don't take that lightly. But today's episode is an odd one. You see, you never sit at an amber traffic light. Because amber isn't a waiting state. It's the split second where the light's already changed and you just really haven't caught up with it yet. You know, the bit between red where you've been parked so long you've read the roadwork signs 4 times, and green where you're actually supposed to be moving. Now, I've spent a long stretch of time parked at red. And a few weeks ago, without much warning, the light changed. And today is about sitting in that 1 second gap and being honest about how little I trusted it and about what actually shifted for me on the way here. Because if any of this is useful to you while you're still parked, it matters a lot more to me than the announcement itself does. And before I get into it, if the show does anything for you, today is a good day to hit follow. There's going to be a shift coming for how it runs going forward, and I'd like as many of you along for it as possible. And if you need support in your own redundancy journey, please visit theinvisibleq.co.uk, where you can find a forum and connect with others who are navigating the same thing. And finally, if you'd like to reach out to the show, suggest a topic or a theme, please visit thenowwhat.co.uk. But for now, enough of all that, let's get into it. So, the metaphorical traffic light was red for a long stretch. And it was longer than I thought it would be, if I'm honest. But a few weeks ago, it ticked over to metaphorical amber. I received an offer. It landed, and I sat there just long enough to wonder if I'd forgotten which metaphorical petal did what. And then I said, yes, metaphorical green. I need to stop with the metaphor thing. But in a few weeks, I go from person doing this show while I figure out what's next to a person doing this show while also apparently having a job. Now, I would love to tell you that I felt triumphant, and there's a definite, it's in there somewhere, but mostly I felt like I'm reading my own news over the shoulder of someone else reading it on their phone. I've reread my offer letter more times than a document that doesn't change, no matter how long you stare at it, really deserves, as though the fourth read might quietly reveal a different sentence to the first. And before I told anyone, I did a bit of a trial run talking to myself in my office. I said the actual sentence out loud to my lovely desk, checking it still worked when I said it outside my head, and it sounded fake. It wasn't that it was untrue, it sounded like I was performing it, like I was reading someone else's good news off auto cue. It took 3 attempts before it stopped sounding like I was auditioning for the part of man with good news. And I have been wrestling with where the heck that comes from. And I think part of it is that the whole redundancy journey, it trains a very specific muscle, and it's one that braces you for the second an official looking email lands because for the longest stretch of time, official-looking emails landing in my inbox were reliably the ones that turned my stomach. And you get so practiced at that flinch that your body stops telling the difference between an email about to hurt you and one that isn't. So the good news arrives and it registers as information a good while before it registers as true information, because the part of my brain doing the sorting hasn't caught up with the fact that this particular category of email doesn't automatically cost you something anymore. And I think there's a cost to hope that I wasn't really aware of before this. And I kind of think it needs to be talked about rather than just kind of getting folded neatly into everything else. You've got to stay hopeful enough to keep applying for roles. You've got to keep showing up to interviews. You've got to keep believing the next one might be it. While every rejection you encounter is also kind of teaching you that hope was the thing that set you up to get hurt again. I'm pretty sure there are hundreds of romantic comedies out there that cover this exact thing. And there was one interview a while back that felt different the moment I walked out of it. And I remember catching myself getting excited on the drive home and then almost immediately talking myself back down from it, because letting that excitement stand felt riskier than the disappointment would have been if it went nowhere. And that's not a healthy way to feel about good news arriving. It's an honest one, and I suspect a lot of you know exactly that feeling. And there's a second thing sitting right behind the disbelief, and it's less about whether the good news is real and more about what it costs. And yet that feels like a very, very ungrateful thing to admit about good news, but I'm admitting it anyway. I've built an entire operating system around this metaphorical red light. Exactly how much time in a day I need to do for house admin, my children's drop off and pick up from school, which hours are mine and which belongs to the show, to sitting with a laptop and a half-formed idea until it forms into a full one, uninterrupted on my own terms. Job searching has been the backbone of nearly every day for the best part of 9 months. And now that it's gone, I'm finding it strangely hard to build anything to replace it in these last few days, even temporarily. And what's really, really strange is that I recognize this exact feeling from the start of all this. Because right at the beginning of redundancy, when the job itself had been the backbone that I'd lost overnight, I had precisely the same struggle building a new routine from nothing. It turns out that losing the thing that structures your days disorients you the same way, whether the thing you're losing is good or bad. But the shape goes away and you're left standing in the gap anyway. Now, if you're in the thick of your own redundancy journey right now, there is a version of the days when nothing feels like it's moving. You haven't received any replies, you haven't got any interviews booked in, just applications going out into what feels like a void or a deep well in a medieval village. I want to say something about that stretch because I struggled to see it clearly at the time, and, looking at it now, in my instance, skills weren't idle during that plateau, even when it felt like they were. Because every rewritten answer, every interview that went nowhere, every bit of research into a company that had the audacity not to call me back, it was compounding somewhere that I couldn't measure day to day. Now, I'm not saying that to make the waiting feel better, because I don't think it does. I'm saying it because it turned out to be true. And I'd rather tell you that honestly than pretend I knew it at the time, because I really, really didn't. And it's not all loss stacked on loss. There are some fantastically great things happening now because I've got this offer through. For example, my wife and I have started to dare to plan a holiday again, properly plan one, not the version where you look up flights and then quietly close the tab when you see the price on them. This whole time, anything like that has been off the table entirely because, firstly, you don't look to book time off from a life that already feels like it's on hold. And secondly, the financial situation, I had to be constantly aware that I'm using my savings to sustain myself. So spending my savings on holiday doesn't really feel like a smart move. But being able to open that conversation back up, even tentatively, has been an unambiguously good part of all of this. But what caught me off guard is just how slowly the actual self-permission came through on doing this. because the caution doesn't switch off the moment that offer landed. It kind of lags behind the good news by weeks, and sometimes longer. So you catch yourself still living like it might all disappear well after the point where it's actually safe not to. And if that's you too, currently doing the maths on a takeaway you can technically afford, that lag isn't you being ungrateful. It's just the last bit of old caution taking its time to catch up with the new facts. Now there's a third layer as well, and it's one that wants to make me qualify every sentence I say from here on in, because I genuinely know how this news lands for some of you, because I've been on the other side of it more times than I can count. Going on LinkedIn, scrolling past someone's "I'm delighted to announce" post, genuinely pleased for them, but also feeling something small and uncharitable rise up that sounds a lot like, when does it get to be me? Now, I'm not saying that's how you're feeling now hearing this. I'm telling you that's how I have felt reliably every time it wasn't my turn. So if my news does something similar to you, where you're glad for me, but a bit further from your own version of this, that's just the maths of watching someone else's light change while you're still parked at yours, and there is nothing to feel guilty about in that. And I found that telling people my news has turned into its own small logistics puzzle, actually. I naturally told the WhatsApp group chat first, the way you do, because the group chat is the only place you can drop something heavy and watch other people's reactions in the form of a GIF. So a version of sharing this that's all shine and gratitude rings false the second it leaves my mouth, because it edits out everyone I know still waiting for their version of today. And the opposite version, heavy on caveats and apologies, is worse, because it turns something good and positive into something I seem to need forgiveness for. So I've mostly landed somewhere in the middle, saying it plainly and trusting that the people worth telling can hold the "I'm pleased for you" and "I wish it were me too" in the same breath. Because in my experience, those two things live together far more often than we let on. And here's the actual useful bit for you, and I need to be careful on how I frame this, because the last thing anyone stuck in the middle of a job search needs is another person telling them that they've cracked the code. I have not cracked the code. The code is like the Enigma thing level difficulty. I got lucky in ways I can't totally take credit for. But there were also a handful of things I did differently this time round, ones I can point towards, and I'd rather tell you what they were than pretend the whole thing was just luck and leave you with nothing to work with. So, I've mentioned in previous episodes before, but the first thing I'd noticed was how much of my applying for jobs had been running on something that looked a little bit like desperation wearing, smart casual. Even when I told myself I wasn't desperate for a role, part of me still was, and I think it showed up in small ways. So applying to things I didn't really want because the volume felt like it had to matter, and chasing the next application instead of preparing properly for the one already in front of me. Once I'd realized this, I'd slowed the number of applications down. I'd picked fewer roles and went deeper onto each one, rather than treating the search as a numbers game I could out-apply my way through. And going deeper for me meant something specific. So obviously we all read the job specifications, but I reread the job specification numerous times. I researched the company beyond the About Us page. And then I did a thing that I hadn't been bothering to do with in my earlier applications. I deliberately went looking for things in the job spec that I felt the least confident about. And this wasn't about memorizing clever answers for them, but it was so that I'd already thought through how I would actually handle those tasks or those themes of subject if they landed on my desk on the first day. So this wasn't about impressing anybody in an interview or in the room. It was just about removing the exact spots where I could feel that my own confidence would wobble mid-interview, because I already knew from plenty of practice precisely where mine tends to go. The second thing was going back over feedback, of which there wasn't much to work with. I think I've done somewhere north of 100 applications, and the actual feedback, I think I've received 2, and only one of those was useful. That one piece, though, it was worth its weight. It essentially gave me feedback to say that my interview was great, but my impact hadn't come across clearly enough. So I went back through my usual answers, the stories that I reach for automatically when handling interview questions, and I checked that each one properly landed on a consequence, not just a result. And to be precise what I mean by that, because I think it is kind of important, it was never really just about pointing to a number and saying, I made the company this much money. Though sometimes that was genuinely there and in the mix. But more often it was around tracing a straight line from something that I had done to something someone else was then able to achieve because of it. So understanding my own part as one cog in a bigger piece of work and being able to actually say out loud what that bigger piece of work turned into, that's a bit of a different thing to just listing what you did and saying, I did it well. I didn't do that in an interview, but you get the idea. It's just connecting what you did to what happened next and being honest about the fact that you were one contributor to the outcome rather than the whole story of it. Now, none of that guarantees anything, and I'm going to come back to being straightforward about it rather than dressing it up as a formula. There are lots of people out there who will do that and it still doesn't land, because so much of this whole journey genuinely comes down to timing and luck that's entirely outside of anyone's control. But those were the real specific things that were different about this attempt compared to the 90 odd before it. And if even one of them is useful to you, that's worth more to me than the announcement itself. It's worth being clear on this too, because there is a version of this episode where it just sounds like the story is over. A new role with a new company brings its own particular flavour of unknown. From whether I fit to whether I'll be any good in the first few weeks, to whether the version of me that spent the best part of a year self-driven and slightly feral still remembers how to sit through actual meetings without narrating it internally like a nature documentary. Redundancy taught me a specific kind of doubt, and I think that doubt is going to be coming with me, employment status or not. But I have been thinking a lot about this show itself, and also the invisible queue and the fantastic work there, and everything that's grown out of a stretch of my life that I didn't really expect to happen. These things have given me somewhere to put the hard bits when I had nowhere else for them to go. I've genuinely wondered whether having a job again quietly, takes that all away from me. And what I actually think, the more that I think about it, is that it's going to change shape for me rather than disappear. The way that most things do once the emergency part is over and what's left is the steadier, ongoing work of it. Because there is a strange loop, even sitting here recording this, if I'm honest. Most of what goes into this show has had a bit of distance on it by the time I talk about it. Enough time to have shaped it into something with a beginning, a middle, and something actionable at the end. This one hasn't had that. By the time you're hearing this, it'll actually be my second day in the new role. Right now recording it, I've not started yet. I don't know how day one went. I don't have the tidy ending that usually comes with the helpful bit of hindsight. And I could have waited a few weeks and given the neater, more processed version of the story, but I chose not to because pretending I'd already made sense of it all would be exactly the kind of performed certainty that I'm kind of hoping to be the antidote for. So, as I've said at the start of, I think, every episode, this is about my journey through and hopefully past redundancy. What I've covered today has been my journey through it, and what will happen in the future will be the past redundancy. So what's the takeaway? If there is one thing I want you to take from today, it's that I've navigated my way through redundancy. But there is still a whole lot of life after left to navigate. And pretending that that finishes the moment an offer email lands would be the less honest version of this episode. Me finding a role was never the whole story about what this podcast's for. It's just the bit that happened to have an end date for me personally. Now going forward, the show is going to have a short break. We're going to be back in a couple of weeks and we're going to have a slight change of focus. The main guidance of it though is going to stay the same. This podcast is here to support you as you navigate your own version of this journey itself. whatever stage of that invisible queue you're currently standing in. But for now, that's me for today. If you found any part of this useful, please do me one favour, hit follow or subscribe, because that's genuinely how people like you find this show in the first place, not some algorithm doing me a favour. And if there's someone in your life mid-scroll through job boards right now feeling like today's episode was written for them, send it their way. And if you're asking yourself now what, you're in the right place. Before you go, if any of this has been useful, please do me a favour and follow the show wherever you're listening. And if you've got 60 seconds and an opinion, leave a review. It helps other people find the show, and it also stops me wondering if I'm turning into some sort of audio hermit. And if you want more than just my voice turning up in your ears once a week, head to theinvisiblequeue.com. It's a support platform for people navigating redundancy, built by people who've actually been through it and remember how strange and exhausting the whole thing is. But for now, thank you for listening. Until next time.